You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast, a proud member of the Anazal Podcast Network. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Captivate, and Apple Podcast. You could join them on one of those networks, or you can support the show by making a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the show's description. 1 Corinthians 11, 18 through 26, and then verse 33 in the Christian Standard Bible. For to begin with, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. Indeed, it is necessary that there be fractions among you, so that those who are approved may be recognized among you. When you come together, then, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For at the meal, each one eats his own supper. So one person is hungry while another gets drunk. Don't you have homes in which to eat and drink? Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What should I say to you? Should I praise you? I do not praise you in this matter. For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. On the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he also took the cup after the supper and said, "This is the cup in the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, when you come together to eat, welcome one another." In this section of scripture, St. Paul is condemning the church in Corinth over how they've been partaking in communion. This church has allowed the supper to become a time of division, and a time where the poorer members of the church were being humiliated by those with more. Kendall Vanderslice, how should the church today see the elements of the sacrament as unifying for the whole body?
Oh man, this is
just in your opinion. It's fine.
just a quick to answer. It hasn't been a source of church division over the last 2,000 years or anything. But I think that actually John Calvin said it best. He identified just what an irony it is that this meal that is meant to be the source of proclaiming the unity of Christ's body, that we have been made one in the body and blood of Christ, that it becomes actually the source of great division throughout church history. These questions drawn from these verses in 1 Corinthians 11, this question of how do we keep from eating and drinking judgment on ourselves and partaking of the Lord's Supper, has ironically made the meal into the source of great division rather than the source of unification, which it is meant to be.
Yeah, I agree. Hey guys, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast. I am really excited for today's episode. We're going to be discussing, we're going to be discussing a lot of stuff, but mostly the book Bake and Pray by Kendall Vanderslice. There is a subtitle to the book, but my brain is lagging.
Liturgies and recipes for baking bread as a spiritual practice.
How could I forget that? That's such a good subtitle. I love it. Part of why I'm so excited, this episode is going to be specifically dedicated to my mother, who is also a patron, Sandra Noel. I love you, Mom. You're great. I got her this book back last December for Christmas. She did some of the preliminary reading. She hasn't started the recipes yet because she's really kind of breaking through some of the stuff that's in the beginning of the book, learning about some of the theology, some of what is liturgy, because the church I grew up in that she still attends doesn't do liturgy. So I think some of that stuff is she's taking piece by piece, but she's really enjoying it. And then that got me interested. And then I was like, I'm not like my mom. I am going back and reading the theology stuff. I was like, let me start with recipes because I just love food, man. And then I go back and reading it because I need to understand the practices, because I don't know stretch and pull or anything about bread, it turns out. And it's been a wild ride, and I'm so excited to be here with the author, Kendall Vanderslice. She is a baker, a writer, and a scholar of both food and theology. Kendall, thank you so much for joining me. Do you prefer Kendall, Chef Vanderslice? Does it matter?
Kendall is great.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I really can't, even starting... I need to do the rest of the intro stuff, but even starting with like the recipes, I just gotta let you know, like each recipe even has like kind of like a backstory to it. And since I started in like Easter time, I'm going through like a Ukrainian recipe, which right now giving thanks with the Ukrainian recipe seems particularly poignant in our time and culture. And I was like, oh, this is so cool going through like the background, all that. Like, oh, this is great. But I digress. This is why TJ does the intro, because I can't stay on point.
No worries.
I'm supposed to convince you guys to listen to other shows on Anzal Podcast Network. One I'm going to be on that's going to be a limited time run or a seasonal one is going to be Turning the Page on Divine Violence. So we're starting with that. If it becomes seasonal, we'll do other books. So starting with one book, we'll do other books, and it'll be turning the page on whatever topic from the other books. So that's another show on the network. There's also Systematic Ecology that has TJ and I on it. And TJ and I both have guested on the show Kung Fu Pizza Party recently, which is another show on the network. So if you guys want to hear more of us or just see what else is in the network, there is a website. It's in the link below stuff. This is the best I can do at reading TJ's parts, guys. Just bear with me. So if you're listening to our show on the Captivate, or if you just have access to Captivate, there's a place to leave a one-time tip. So if you're not into like subscriptions or Patreon or any of that, and you just want to support the show, you can do a one-time tip on Captivate there. That link should also be in the show notes. I write the show notes, so I should know what's in there, but I don't. So take that for what you will. And back to the stuff that I like to talk about. There's a holy sacrament of unity on this show, which is silliness, because you can't be divided when you're being as silly as I like to be. And for some reason, TJ just keeps letting me do this in all of our episodes, even though we have like really cool guests now. And he could be like, Josh, these people are too serious for this. And he just hasn't stopped me. I don't know. If your favorite TV character were to bake bread, what kind of bread do you think they would bake? If you want, I can answer first, but I forgot what the silly question was this week. And I'm like, man, that's a good one. And I'm trying to think, because I'm not, okay. I'm pretty sure I do. I'm in between two different people for my favorite character. One of them definitely would never be able to bake bread, so I'm going to ignore him. I'm going to go with the Doctor from Doctor Who. And currently, I have the Doctor is Churigawa, who they're showing a little bit more of his blackness in his character, which is really cool. So I'm thinking maybe we'd get like a one of those Kenyan breads. I think is there a recipe in your book from Kenya? I feel like there was.
There's an Ethiopian bread.
Ethiopia, okay, that's what I probably was thinking of. Actually, I think Kenya is where I had some. This is Epcot Disney. There was a really good barbecue that was Kenya. I think that's what my brain's confusing with.
Okay.
But either way, like I feel like it's going to be something like that. It's probably a little bit of spice in it. And it's going to be good, and I'm gonna enjoy it. That's what I think. I think he'd probably actually be a pretty good chef. If I would have got David Tennant, my favorite Doctor, I might be in trouble. But I think since the current Doctor seems a little bit more artistically inclined, and I'm going to assume that is going to reach into culinary arts as well. I'm hoping. Kendall, what about you? Favorite TV character? What kind of bread are they baking you?
The person that came to mind, it was hard to choose a favorite TV character, but a character that I thoroughly enjoy and really liked imagining getting into bread is Schmidt from New Girl. And I think he would go straight to like croissants, or I feel like he would get really into sourdough. He would get into the sourdough and he would go to the extreme. And he would be have to get everything perfected. And that's what I think he would do. Or maybe the croissants, he would just go all out and, creating his own butter block and making sure he gets the flaky
I feel like
layers.
he'd even grow like the handlebar mustache, everything. Like I feel like he would go really ridiculous.
Yes, he would.
Yeah.
He would.
That's a great show.
It is.
Oh man, that's a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm just like imagining these scenarios. I want. Listen, TV producers just need to listen to our podcast so I can see these things happen. But on to more of the real show stuff. One thing we've seen that really helps with unity, since our podcast is primarily about Christian unity, is to hear one another's story. So we were hoping that you could share with us some about your faith journey, getting to where you are now, and maybe some about the faith community you're plugged into these days.
Yeah, so I grew up in the church. My grandfather was a pastor. I have several uncles and cousins who were all pastors. So in many ways, kind of not just the Christian faith, but even like theological discussion was a part of family life all growing up. And so in some sense, there's always been a curiosity around faith an openness to asking questions and to dialoguing and to disagreeing. I remember many holiday tables where we had intense theological conversations as just part of the Christmas dinner conversation. And I'm really grateful to have grown up in a context like that with, very thoughtful family members who disagreed with one another and modeled how to disagree well. But so I grew up largely in churches that were not liturgically inclined in any capacity. And so, I was introduced to liturgy in college, and I was at a point where I loved the Lord deeply, but also felt a lot of anxiety in my faith. I think, I'd been taught that you pray the sinner's prayer, that you become a Christian, and then there's kind of this and then what? There was this ongoing anxiety of wanting to live rightly, but then always sort of feeling like, is there anything more to this? And am I actually in God's good graces? And how do I, if I'm not emotionally experiencing God in worship, then am I on the right track? And so I was in this place in college where I just was feeling very unmoored. And there was a lot of anxiety, within some of the church communities that I was in about making sure you're listening to God rightly and giving yourself over to God enough. And there was no real sort of grounded sense of how do I know God's presence in these very tangible ways? And so I was introduced to the Anglican tradition, to the concept of liturgy, to these ideas that, we have these words, we have these rhythms, we have these practices that the church has been rooted in for thousands and thousands of years. And the sacrament of communion is one of those, and that this is a way in which God is present with us in this deeply tangible way. And we can know and trust God's presence whether or not we feel it, because every single week we go forward and we receive this bread and we receive the cup. And that was just deeply meaningful to me in that season and really transformed the ways that I thought about my faith and the ways that I understood my own vocation as a baker. I wanted to become a baker from an early age. So by the time I was in college, I was fully planning to go on and work professionally in bakeries. And so then when this added piece of, this bread is actually central to my worship as well, it really began to change things for me. So I started to question, what does this bread that I spend my morning baking have to do with this bread that I receive at the communion table every single week? And that just launched a whole line of theological questions that took me down the path that I have been on for the last, 12 years now. And so I am still a part of the Anglican Episcopal tradition. The liturgy is still deeply meaningful to me. The Eucharist is still, for me, central to everything. But I have the great joy of baking bread and talking about bread with Christians from all different backgrounds. And so really seeing the ways that this bread can be a point of unity and connection between us despite our many theological differences.
Yeah. I just follow up on that a little bit and get into the book. So Bake and Pray. One of the really interesting things to me, I'm trying to find a way to word this. I'll talk about some of the stuff that I get from other people, right? So we have another podcast that we're a part of, Systematic Ecology, that I mentioned earlier. And it's like faith and fandom kind of thing. And a lot of times people hear you tying two things together and immediately assume, okay, so this means super evangelical, probably Southern Baptist, they have this preconceived notion because there's a certain brand of church that tend to try to fit everything into the square peg hole kind of thing, and they're like, oh, this must be what this is. And we're like, actually, no, we're not doing that at all. We're asking what the fandom's asking and trying to engage honestly. But because I guess Christianity as a whole has been branded as this, we're trying to make everything about Jesus all the time. Sometimes people just see something and assume that's what you're doing and that there's not a real connection there. And I think that's why the subtitle actually is really important, because you include the word liturgy, and that's what made my brain go, wait a minute, this probably isn't that cookie cutter thing. This is probably a little bit more. And then I heard you, I think, speaking with Caitlin Chess on one of the Holy Post things, because I love all their stuff. We've had Caitlin Chess on the show before too, and she's probably one of the coolest people I've talked to. Just like personality wise, I'm like, I wish you weren't so famous because I think we could be friends.
She is a good friend of mine. So
yeah, she's great. Yeah. Well, but yeah. So how do you ever get any of that stuff where people are like, oh, hey, they like kind of just assume you're trying to make it fit instead of looking into it and seeing, oh, wait a minute, maybe there is more here.
Yeah, I get a lot of people at first are like, what, food and faith? What in the world do those have to do with one another? Or bread and faith? What in the world does that have to do with one another? But usually as soon as I say, well, there's a table at the center of Christian worship and it is set with bread, bread and wine, then like that, I think that helps people go like, oh yeah, I guess there is a clear connection there. And maybe I haven't really kind of dug into it enough. And then they'll start to go to like, oh yeah, Jesus is the bread of life. And, they'll start to think of some of those connections. And usually that's an opportunity for me to say like, hey, maybe bread shows up so many times in scripture, like not just because it's some sort of ordinary metaphor, but because there's something significant to bread itself.
Yeah, which actually ties in. So I've recent convert to Lutheranism. I'm not trying to think of the word. I became Lutheran like a year ago, started dating a little bit before then, but I grew up Pentecostal. And so now that I'm Lutheran, I get to claim the whole saint and sinner line, we get to claim that now. But one of the things I really loved in your book, reading, I think it was probably in the preface or one of those early chapters that I originally skipped for recipes and then went back to. But you talk about, and my mom, I think, mentioned this as well, bread plays a part in the curse of Genesis when it talks about how we're going to work the fields. And it also plays a part in the redemptive work of the church and the gospel accounts whenever, we talk about Jesus with the communion. Could you unpack for us a little bit how you believe breaking bread can remind us both of our brokenness and of God's promises, or, of how we're saints and sinners, as Luther might say?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first place that bread appears in the Bible is in Genesis 3, verse 19. And so at this point in the book of Genesis, we've had the creation accounts. We have this narrative of, God created these gardens filled with beautiful trees and fruits and placed the humans in the garden and tasked them with the care of creation. And then they were nourished by the fruits of these trees. And of course, we know they were told to avoid the fruit of one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And here in Genesis 3, we are learning that they did not forego that temptation. And now we are learning the ramifications of this fall, learning the ramifications of the fact that they ate of the fruit of this tree. Yeah. But so prior to this point in Genesis, humanity has not really been involved in the production of the food that they consume, right? They just get to pluck from the tree and eat. And what part of the curse of Genesis 3 is that the soil will sprout forth thistles and thorns, that it's by the sweat of your brow that you will eat your bread. And this bread that is first introduced in Genesis 3:19, it requires an incredible amount of work to grow wheat and harvest wheat, to thresh it, grind it, turn it into flour, to turn that flour into dough, gather firewood to heat up an oven before finally baking that bread and being able to eat it. This is 9 months or more of labor that is required in order to consume this food. And yet this food, bread, contains most of the nutrients that humans need in order to survive. We actually can live off of just bread and water alone for a very, very, very long time. Yeah. And so the bread historian William Rubel kind of draws on this imagery of Genesis 3. And he says that from the dawn of agriculture, bread has been a simultaneous blessing and curse on humanity. It contains the nutrients that we need in order to survive. We can live off of bread alone, but also in the production of bread, we are reminded that the world is not as it's meant to be. And yet also, I think there's this beautiful juxtaposition that here in Genesis 3, God is sharing with us the ramifications of this fall, and yet also offering us this gift of bread and inviting us to be participants with God in the transformation of creation into something beautiful, something delicious, something nourishing. And so in that way, bread is this constant reminder of, yes, bread is it came to be because of the brokenness of creation, and yet also it is this gift that is made possible by God in the midst of the brokenness of this creation.
Yeah, that's beautiful stuff. I'm trying to decide if I want to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to delve into a little bit of a biochem nerdery, and
great.
our listeners will just forgive us. One of the things that you bring up that's really interesting too is, and I'm going to call this Tolkien-esque because I love J.R.R. Tolkien. And for those who don't know, he does explicitly say that Lord of the Rings is not about World War II, but is about the dangers of industry. So there you go. One thing that you bring up that's really interesting is like how many people have developed this allergicness. I can't think of the word to gluten.
Sensitivity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that part of the book was really interesting. And then as someone who was studying nutrition for a while and some of that kind of like biochem stuff, you know, I know that a lot of your carbs and stuff can produce more of that LDL, VLDL kind of cholesterol that's really bad for you. But from my understanding, baking it yourself, some of this process that you talk about, if we're doing it that way instead of the incredibly industrialized, looking at you, Sauron. If Sauron baked you bread, you're in trouble, you know. Whereas if you get in the Shire, maybe it won't be so bad because like they're actually doing it by hand, and we're doing it more naturally, I guess. Could you maybe speak to some, because like to some people that probably sounds like craziness and just like conspiracy theories or something. But
yeah. So the production of bread historically has been a very, very long process, that in order for the yeast to ferment the dough and transform the starches in the dough into, you know, the yeast will eat the starches naturally present in the dough. And in the process, they'll release carbon dioxide that gets trapped in this protein network called gluten. That is what ferments and grows our dough. And this transformation, this long, slow transformation is also what provides flavor to the dough. And it's what unlocks nutrients in the wheat that allows our body to digest them. So a little over a century ago, we were able to isolate what it was that was causing this transformation, right? So like prior to kind of Louis Pasteur, essentially, we didn't really know what it was that was causing fermentation. We knew that if you mixed together wheat and water for a while, you'd get either beer or you'd get bread. We knew that if you mixed grapes, you know, and smashed them and left the juice out, that it would ferment into something delicious. You know, we knew that this process of fermentation happened, and we had a name for that transformation, leaven, but we didn't know what creatures were responsible for it. And so in the last little over a century, we were able to isolate what creatures those were, and then able to kind of separate them, dehydrate them, and get this dried yeast that we could then add into our dough. We realized we could add the yeast and then we could add in a bunch of sugar that the yeast could eat really quickly, and we could have bread from start to finish in a matter of a couple of hours.
Yeah.
The other thing about bread is that it is a very physically involved process. Our bodies, our hands have to get in there in order for, you know, us to ferment or to mix the dough. And then that's also what introduces some of this bacteria and yeast into the dough that ferments it and rises it. And so a little over a century ago, there was this great fear of bacteria, great fear of the body's ability to contaminate. And so industrial bread was developed to try and protect us from these contaminants of our bodies and this yeast. And so there was this big marketing campaign about how you could have a loaf of bread that was never touched by a pair of human hands. And it turns out that when you make bread really quickly, when you don't let it ferment, when you don't introduce this deeply human element and bacterial element, then it's really hard for our bodies to digest. It does not transform the wheat in a way that we can assimilate the nutrients. And also our body recognizes it as something harmful and kind of attacks us in response. And so, you know, we have all these different sensitivities to wheat that have arisen in this past century. And I think it is largely because of the way that we produce our bread. So most people that are reacting to wheat, outside of those who have celiac disease, that's a different thing, that is, you know, something separate. But aside from that, most people who are reacting to wheat are actually reacting to the starches in the wheat rather than the protein, the gluten. And it is through a long fermentation that those starches get broken down into a way that our bodies can digest. And it's a completely different experience of bread.
Yeah. I call her my god sister. It's like my parents' goddaughter. Yeah. But she has celiacs and a very serious case. You know, I don't want to underplay that, but it is interesting how much we just associate things and we do that correlation causation fallacy kind of deal where we're like, oh, it must be the gluten. And it's like, well, actually, there's a lot of other stuff in bread that it could be. That could be.
Yes. It is largely the process by which we make it. Yeah.
Also, I am now incredibly tempted, since I have a friend who works on a Tolkien Society journal, that I'm like, I wonder if I can convince him to let me write an article. What if Sauron baked bread? That's for another time. But for now, I do want to kind of get into like some of the original inspirations for the book, or maybe some of like why you chose the specific breads that you did. Because I know, or I'm sure you have plenty of other recipes you could have included, but it seems like you were really intentional, the ones that you did put in the book. So could you talk some about the inspiration for the book and then the specific recipes you chose maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is based off of a workshop that I teach called Bake and Pray. I started developing this workshop about 10 years ago. I have been teaching it in churches, schools, retreat centers all over the country ever since. But as I was beginning to work on this book, I realized, I can really kind of elaborate on the themes of this workshop in a way that not just teaches people how to bake bread or how to bake bread as a spiritual practice, but helps them understand more fully what it means for bread to be the central element in Christian practice. And so the first half of the book is focused on kind of lessons in baking bread and introducing the concept of baking bread in the form of a liturgy rather than a recipe. So using it as a prayer practice. But then the second half of the book includes recipes to bake all throughout the liturgical year. And so my hope was to introduce readers to the concept first of the liturgical year. This is, Christians throughout all of history have kind of told time through the story of the Christian faith. And so the liturgical year begins in the season of Advent when we are awaiting Christ's first coming and also Christ's return, which leads us to Christmas, where we celebrate Christ's first coming, and then Epiphany, which is the recognition of the welcoming of the Gentiles into the people of God, and the visit of the Magi to the baby Jesus. And then we have the season of Lent, which leads us into Easter. And then finally, we have the All Saints, which is the kind of Halloween, the reminder of saints throughout all of history. And so what I wanted this book to do is both kind of narrate the story of this Christian story through the liturgical year, but then also show how bread is significant to Christians all around the world and throughout history, through a variety of Christian traditions. And so the breads that I chose to include are breads that represent a wide swath of Christians around the world, a wide swath of traditions, both Orthodox, Protestant, and Catholic, many different geographic areas, and then all of these different seasons as well. And so it was really fun exploring the different many different breads. I had to really weed out and decide specifically which ones I would include, but just so fun to be able to tell these stories through the breads that mark these days.
Yeah. Just out of personal curiosity. So we go from Eastertide to All Saints Day. Why didn't we include any Pentecost breads?
So I was interested in that, and I just couldn't find any breads that were particular to Pentecost.
That's a really good reason.
Yeah. So that was supposed to be in there, and I just couldn't find any specific Pentecost breads. So instead, the liturgical, the seasons go from Eastertide, you have ordinary time before you get to Advent again. Yeah. And so the prayers through the church year are supposed to be the ordinary time, or the prayers for every occasion. They're supposed to be the ordinary time. Piece.
Yeah. That's right. I'm not sure if I want to wait till the All Saints Day part of the year to start the All Saints Day breads.
They are really good breads, so I recommend them any time of year.
These look great, especially because it seems like you included more Latino kind of culture, and I'm like, I love their food.
Yeah, the guagua de pan, the Ecuadorian All Saints bread, those are delicious. I highly recommend doing the dulce de leche in the inside. They're so good.
Okay, so should I do I have to wait? Can I just go ahead?
No, you can do them anytime. You can do them anytime.
I honestly almost started your book during Lent, and then I was like, Lent feels bitter. I'm gonna wait till Easter.
That's a good time to do it.
Yeah, but now, I'm kind of sad that I did though, because the only Easter one that I didn't do, it's because I'm gonna wait till next year. I think you have the hot cross buns, which I think you said were traditionally done. Was it Good Friday? On
Good Friday, yes.
Yeah, and I waited till after Good Friday, and I was like, I'm gonna hit it next Good Friday. I'm gonna make sure I get it done. But
there you go.
Yeah, no. So the three that I actually was able to do, my co-host did a couple of the other ones. I'm going to talk to him separately a little bit so we can just have our own little powwow about the recipes, and I'll either edit it in or we'll do like a special thing for our patrons or something. I don't know.
Perfect.
Sometimes I get spontaneous. I don't know what I'm doing on this. They shouldn't let me have a mic, but it's fine. So I did the Pascha. I might be saying all of these incorrectly, so feel free to correct me. I do a lot of reading, and then I never know how to pronounce words because I'm like, I don't talk to people. I just read books. Pinka, and then the Defo-Dabo. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Sweet. I think the Pinka might be, is that the, it's like a sweeter bread? Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, that's the Croatian bread.
That might be my favorite bread I've ever tried. And I was like, wait a minute, I made this. This is weird. But
it is delicious.
I think I did something wrong. I'm not supposed to do this probably, but I'm just going to talk on air and later about this. So I did the Pinka and Defo-Dabo at the same time. And in the very center, it was still a little raw. Is that potentially because I cooked them together in the oven? Should I have done it separate? Is that what I messed up?
No, it's fine to cook them at the same time. I think they just could have cooked for a little bit longer.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a simple fix. And I'm definitely going to make... Especially the pig. I'm definitely going to make that again. I even said, whenever I made it, like I had my wife try some and she made her friend try some. And I was like, I'm pretty sure whenever we have like Thanksgiving or the next like big family thing, I'm going to bring this giant thing of bread and be like, guys, I did this.
Yes, you should. You should show it off. It's good stuff.
Yeah. And I'm going to put a picture up on our Instagram or something of it too. The only thing like visually that I think I messed up on, I underestimated the cutting. So I cut a little too deep because in my mind, I'm like, this is just gonna, because when you poke it, it bounces back. So I'm like, that's just gonna like fill the thing in it. And I just didn't. And I was like, oh, I guess I don't need to cut that deep. Which you want to talk about that? Because the Pinka is like, it's like a really big roll basically, but it's got the 3 lines that you cut in it that are supposed to be representative of the Trinity. Could you maybe elaborate on that specifically? I know that's like a really specific part of your book, but
So I mean, one of the fun things in this book was seeing a lot of the similarities between different breads that arise in different places. And so several of them had kind of traditions of how you would score them for different kinds of meanings. And so the Pinka, there are several different sort of iterations of the Pinka. So I did the simplest one for this, which is just a circular bread, and you score it with 3 lines that are meant to represent the 3 parts of the Trinity. But there are other kinds of designs that are oftentimes used for these as well. And all of them have various kinds of theological significance.
Yeah, that was really cool. There's so much I love and I could dig into, and I do have limited time, so I'm trying to be choosy of what I want to talk about. I'm going to just say, just to put the little blurb out there, one thing I find really interesting just in general is just speaking to the image of God and stuff, as we've done podcasting in general, because, I love hiking and stuff. Our listeners might be aware. And it's sometimes you see that in the Bible, and then you definitely see it in nature, like God's goodness, and you speak to that. And then talk to someone who's passionate about baking, and I'm reading this book and I'm like, wow, it makes so much sense that you see God in this. And if you talk to TJ about ping pong of all things, it's like you're like, wait a minute, you're crazy. And then he starts talking and you're like, okay, I totally get why for you, ping pong's a spiritual practice. And you talk about baking as a spiritual practice, not just like we're baking the bread and there's significance in the bread, but like the practice itself as like a prayer while you're kneading the dough kind of thing. Did you want to speak any more on that before we did anything else? Because I know that was like a really big part of your book, is just how it is a spiritual practice.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest lessons that bread can teach us is the significance of rest. That bread does not become bread without rest. And there is a lot of rest intertwined in the entire process of baking bread. And I think oftentimes, especially in American culture, we are just really bad at rest. We oftentimes approach rest from this mindset of like, maybe I'll do it, but before I like hit the place of, or maybe even when I hit the place of total burnout. But the whole time I'm resting, I'm just thinking about all the things that aren't happening when I rest. And so we treat rest as something that is maybe even a little bit irresponsible, or maybe it's a reward when we finally gotten our work done. Not as something that is integral to our daily lives, but God both commands us and also invites us to rest. And that is because I think rest is necessary and transformational in our daily lives. And so bread is at every turn of the bread baking process, it is reminding us of the importance of rest, that bread hopefully kind of flips our paradigm to help us question, if the bread does not have rest, it does not become bread, which then can encourage us to question, okay, if I do not rest, rather than thinking about all that's not getting done when I'm taking the time to rest, I think we ought to imagine what is not getting done in me and through me when I don't take the time to rest. Yeah. And so this baking bread as a prayer practice is meant to help invite bakers and readers into the practice of rest, and through the process of baking bread, inviting them into these reflections and to understand how their very movements of their body can be a form of prayer, that God can be present with us in this deeply tangible way through something like baking bread. And my hope is that those who go through this prayer practice in this book might also begin to see the ways that their other hobbies and activities are also opportunities for prayer. Maybe potters or gardeners. Those are the ones who I hear from most often, who read the book and are like, this has changed how I go through my pottery practice or my gardening practice. But I think that can extend to so many other practices as well. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that did stand out to me, maybe in kind of a weird way. Because I remember reading this and you're talking about rest and me looking at it and I'm like, wait a minute. And, I cook for a living and baking, that's cooking. Cooking is work. What do you mean? The more I thought about it, my version of rest, and as an ADHD person, I'm particularly challenged on this because I pretty regularly get criticized for not resting, but I'm like, you guys don't understand. For me, sometimes what rest looks like is I'm walking 3 hours up and down the beach while also listening to a podcast that I have to edit, making mental notes. Because that's a place that I feel comfort in. And I understand for everyone else, they're like, wait a minute, you walked for 3 hours and that's awful. And I'm like, no, I find rest in that though. And for me, what TJ does with ping pong, I'm like, this is athletic. I have to put so much effort to just not let him defeat me in 30 seconds. And I'm like, what do you mean this is rest? But now reading how you're talking about with baking and then putting it together with how I've been criticized as an ADHD person and then thinking about TJ and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Rest isn't always what we picture. It's not always literally sitting beside the river of waters where God's giving us rest on the, it's sometimes God's giving me that rest.
Can be an active thing sometimes. Yeah. Well, and for me too, this book came out of my own work in the professional, restaurant industry where baking for many years was not rest. Baking was a form of great stress that the approach you kind of have to in order to sustain a bakery or a restaurant is to fill in every single second. That, time is like Tetris where you can't let a single second go to waste and you have to, fill every single moment. And it is exhausting and it is taxing. And so baking is not always a form of rest. And for me, definitely has not always been a form of rest. But this practice has helped to reform me, I think, as a baker in the ways that many years in that industry kind of deformed me and took away my love of baking.
Yeah. No, that's awesome though. Well, awesome that you refound it. Not that it, I think you know it.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
So I did want to touch on one other thing, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into this other cultural aspect of it, the different backgrounds in the bread. I'm going to tie this in kind of weird, but there's a book I've really enjoyed that I probably no one knows about. It's called Insider Jesus. I can't remember the author's name, which is awful. But it talks about how in all these different cultures around the world, there's certain places where the name Christian doesn't mean the same thing it might to us. In some cultures, Christian is just those are the people who come to kill us, or those are the people who come to do this. And people, so you'll have groups in the book that are they're call themselves, we're Muslims for Christ, or we're, this for Jesus, or, they have different names. But they're following Jesus. They believe in salvation or whatever, but they still take some of these old religious practices and kind of incorporate them into their Christianity. And at first I was like, I don't like this. And then the book points out, hey, that's all Christianity started as, right? We took these Jewish practices. And when we think about communion, that was taking the Passover meal and making it Christian. And I, since we directly come from Judaism, it's a little bit more stomachable. But I think that's actually an important thing across the board. And that's something that book made a case for. I don't think you're making that case as far as like religions go, but as far as like some of these cultures, like it is important that we take something. Like for me, it was so meaningful to bake that Ukrainian bread during Easter time, thinking about like the world we live in right now and the challenges that people in Ukraine are actually facing right now. And I'm going, wait a minute, here I am able to celebrate this culture through food that's really on the verge of maybe not existing anymore. You know, like it's like, this is really deeply meaningful. And I don't know, maybe something about how we do communion should reflect these things in our culture, or when we're doing our meals, we need to think about like our own heritage, that kind of stuff. Could you speak to like, why was that important for you to include in the book, and kind of like maybe some of your thoughts on the same stuff? Because I feel like I just rambled.
Yeah. Well, so our food always tells stories that, every ingredient that we use has a story behind it and how it arrived and the places that it did to create the different cuisines that exist. We can tell kind of the story of human history through various kinds of foods. And so part of what I wanted to do with these breads was to help tell the story of how Christianity arrived in and sort of took form in all of these different locations. Because the spread of Christianity is in some ways, in many places, the spread of, it is the spread of something good. And also in many ways, it was coupled together with the spread of harm as well. And so wanting to be able to use bread to tell an honest story about both the beauty of our faith and also the pain that's oftentimes intertwined with the background of our faith. And so that was part of what I was wanting to do with this. But another piece that's at play is that, so many of these traditions took root in locations, like oftentimes I think Christians, especially from more of an evangelical background, tend to be critical of some aspects of the liturgical calendar and of some of these holidays, thinking about kind of their pagan roots. And so I wanted to help reframe some of those stories to help understand what Christianity looked like as it took root in these places. And so, so many of these traditions, Christian traditions, are built around, I guess you could say, quote unquote, like pagan practices or pagan ways of telling time. But that's because in a pre-industrial society, these are just the ways of telling time, right? You observe the movements of the sun and the movements of the moon. And this is how you are able to locate yourself in time, which is necessary for agriculture. And so these pre-industrial societies, like when you are telling time and you are like remembering history through these movements of creation, then if you like your religious context then gets sort of woven into that as well. And so as Christianity arrived in different locations, then they continued in this way of telling time. But instead of having these like, pagan stories to go with it, it became a way of telling the story of the Christian faith. And so I wanted to kind of help reframe, I think, how Christians sometimes think about both liturgical history and how it connects with the roots of the places that it's in order to help us understand and be more generous to and sympathetic to, I think, our ancestors in the faith, who lived in a very different context than we did and have passed on this beautiful tradition that helps tell the story of the region and also the story of the faith as it kind of arrived in that region.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about communion earlier, and that's one of the things that really makes the bread thing so interesting to me. Growing up in the context that I did, and I don't want to make this marks of division. I have a lot of opinions on how I think communion should go, and I'm sure so many other people do too. But I've come to appreciate other contexts. So for me personally, I would prefer when we take communion it to be a bitter wine because it's supposed to remind me of the death of Jesus. But I've heard contexts where they're using a sweeter wine. It's supposed to be because like that sweet victory we have in Jesus. And I'm like, okay, I prefer that bitter thing. Like, I think that's what it's supposed to be, but I still see that there's significance. There's like why you did that makes so much sense to me. And that's beautiful. But I think growing up where it was like so many times you would get like the pre-packaged little like grape juice with a cracker on top, and like, I think that takes so much of the meaning out of it. And I'm glad when people do communion point blank, like I'm not just trying to be like, oh, hey, that's bad. Don't do that. But going to a Lutheran church now where there's these older ladies who prepare the bread each week. And I'm like, I'm looking at this going, oh, this isn't just like something cheap that we're just doing like because that's what we do. Like, this is something that people put work and thought into, and that there's a purpose to what we're doing. And I just like putting purpose into it, and like not just communion or meals in general. So I really love your book for like really highlighting some of that. Do you think maybe we should do different kinds of breads at communion sometimes, like to remember these other cultures, or are you like, this is something separate?
No, so I mean, I think there are, this is kind of a live question in many different traditions. And so I know within the Methodist Church and potentially some other traditions as well, there is an annual practice of World Communion Sunday. And oftentimes on this World Communion Sunday, they will have the altar laid with breads of all different kinds from all different
that's cool.
parts of the world. That's this way
cool.
of sort of telling the story. Yeah, but then it is also a live question within Christian tradition of whether or not the bread of communion should be made with wheat or whether it can be made of another grain. Thomas Aquinas said that it must be made of wheat. And so this has been an ongoing sort of question throughout much of Christian history. There's also this ongoing sort of division over whether or not the bread should be leavened. And so the church in the East says that it should be leavened. The church in the West, the Catholic Church, said that it should not be leavened. Most Protestant churches allow either one these days. So in some sense, I think that great intentionality behind the elements that we use in the Eucharist is very important. I think that it is good that people have specific convictions over how, what elements they use and how those elements are presented. And also, I think that it is good that we have disagreements over that and that we can see sort of beauty in these differing traditions. And so I love the way that Aquinas kind of put it in one of his questions in the Summa was around the question of yeast and whether or not Christians ought to have a leavened or an unleavened bread. And his response is essentially to say, well, if you live in the East, then you should have a leavened bread because that is the like tradition of your church, and there is good theological reason behind it. And if you're in the West, you should have unleavened bread because that is tradition of your church, and there is good theological reason behind it. And so I love kind of holding on to that tension of there is good theological reason behind the things that we do, and also it is good that we have differences that can come up in tension with one another and reveal new variants of our faith.
Yeah. We do have an ongoing joke on this podcast for some reason where TJ and I just always disagree with Thomas Aquinas when we can. So I'm going to say officially our podcast is against wheat now. But reluctantly, we're going to have to accept that second part because, that's the whole Christian unity thing. And I think you might have been right about that.
Well, and, I can't wait until, the new creation when I can have a conversation with Aquinas about this because, I disagree with him, of course, on the wheat front. But one of the things that I was talking with a friend who is much better read on Aquinas than I am, and I think understands him much more fully than I do. And his response was, I think that I think that Aquinas' response would have been different if he had written a few hundred years later. But when Aquinas is writing, he can't fathom a continent that doesn't grow wheat, right? Like the Europeans have not arrived in the Americas yet. They don't know that there's an entire continent that doesn't historically grow wheat. And so in his mind, wheat is prevalent. Wheat is everywhere. Everyone has access to wheat, and it is always the finer grain. So of course, it's the grain that we use as Christ's body. And if he had been, confronted with the reality that there's entire groups of people who never ate wheat and do not grow wheat, I think his response would have changed.
Man, that sounds like a good what if. Maybe when Disney's done with Marvel, what if they can do Thomas Aquinas what if series?
Well, and I get to that answer because of his kind of nuance and thoughtfulness in response to the yeast question. I think he probably would have had a little more nuance when it came to wheat if that had been the reality he understood.
Yeah. Not to get completely off the rails, but I will say in general, when I read Aquinas's his views on things, I usually am like, that seems illogical and wrong. But then when I hear his reasoning of but I don't actually hold this tight, and I think that we can actually work together, I'm like, man, what's funny is we would have agreed on the church unity bit and then maybe disagreed about every other doctrinal issue, but it's fine. Because we agreed on the church unity thing first.
That's
so we're
right,
okay.
That's right.
But no, so man, before we get near the end, I'm having so much fun. I could talk to you. You're a really fun person to talk to. I really enjoyed your book. And now talking to you, I'm like, man,
now I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Yeah. And now having spoken to you, I definitely can see where your voice comes through in the book so much. I'm like, wow, she kind of talks and writes the same. I love when that happens. Ironically, that's one of the few places I disagree with C.S. Lewis, where he doesn't think that how you speak and write should be the same. And I'm like, that's sad, because now when I see you in heaven, I know that you're not going to sound like how I think you're going to sound. But it's fine.
Well, with this book, it was especially easy to have that because I have taught this workshop so many times. It's like I've said these things a million times. Yeah. I just needed to get it down on paper, and so it was really fun. This one was the easiest and most fun of my books to write because of that.
Yeah, I really want to pick up. I saw there was another one that was food related with your name on that I think I have in my Amazon basket, but.
Yeah, I have 3 books. So I have one also, By Bread Alone was the book just before this, which is my memoir, kind of theology of bread as told through my story. And then a book called We Will Feast, which is a study of churches that have their service around the table.
Okay. We Will Feast is the one that's on my list. By Bread Alone is about to be on my list in 2 seconds after we're done, because I open it on another tab so I can do that. Because yeah,
perfect.
But no, I enjoy your writing style. Just speaking to you, it's been great. Just so we don't miss anything, is there any maybe a recipe that stands out to you that you really enjoy making, or that you think has specific spiritual significance, or anything that maybe we missed that people might want to know about you or your book?
Oh man, I mean, I think everything in the book is delicious. So
yeah, me too.
I just highly recommend checking it out and working your way through it all.
Yeah. Don't start with the pica bread, but please don't skip the pica bread. That's what I'm gonna say, guys. It was so good. I still can't get over it. I was because I'm good with meat usually, and that's basically it. But I made a bread. I was like, this is really good. I was so proud of myself. Yeah, that's all this is. It's just me patting myself on the back. It's fine. But okay, well, with that, then one of the things we like to do before wrapping up, we do always ask our guests if you had to provide just a single tangible action, something practical that would better help engender unity in the church today. What's something practical that you think our listeners could go do right now?
I think we need to eat more meals with people.
Yeah. I
think we need to eat more meals in our churches, and we need to eat more meals with people from different churches and different faith backgrounds.
Yeah. And if you're okay with it, I would like to even add the challenge of cook more meals for people. Because I found as I've got more into cooking, that's there's something different about we went and grabbed fast food and came back and watched a TV show, as opposed to I invited someone over and made a meal for them,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if everybody started doing this stuff, what do you think we would see change in our churches and in the world around us, and maybe in our own relationships?
Yeah, I think that we would see a much deeper commitment to trying to understand one another and to hear one another's stories that would give us just a lot more grace for one another and a lot more curiosity about our differences and what they can teach us about, I think, the creativity of God and the diversity of humanity and of God's creation.
Yeah. It's beautiful stuff. And I completely agree. And this is where I have to start doing TJ's part again, and I'm bad at. So we do always like to ask everybody to just share a God moment. It's just a moment where we've seen God in recently. Doesn't have to be in the last week. Can be just whenever. And TJ always likes to make me go think first, so everybody has time to think. This one's going to be silly of me. Mine's going to be that I had someone cancel a podcast with me this week and have to reschedule to next week. And I know that that's a really lame one, but what had happened was I was finishing up my school semester, and everybody kept asking me to do podcasts, or to have guest spots, or for me to guest on somebody else's show. And I kept being oh, I'm finished with school next week, so next week's a great time. And I had 5 million podcasts I was supposed to do this week. And I was oh man, I made this awful for me. And when I love everybody we talk to, I'm really excited to speak. But when you do multiple in a row, I know that I'm not giving my best quality, and also I just get tired. So when one person was can we do it next week? I was oh, thank Jesus. And it just, it was such a relief. And I kind of feel maybe God let that happen so that we could have a better recording and that I could enjoy it more. But yeah, so Kendall, what is have you seen God anything recently that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I did this this week. I spent the first half of this week with a group of people who were all getting trained to teach this Bake and Pray workshop. And it was just a joy to hear their stories of how they arrived to this place this week, and just seeing the ways that it's always a gift for me to see the ways that God has been kind of meeting other people behind the scenes through my work over the years that I have not known about. And so that was just a real joy to get to hear their stories this week.
God bless. That's awesome. Speaking of which, for those listening, if they want to get your book, I know it's on Amazon. Is there any like preferred place that you would send them to get your book? Or maybe if they're interested in the Bake and Pray class or any of that, where should they go?
Yeah, so you can get the book anywhere that books are sold. If you go to my website, kendallvanderslice.com, the Bake and Pray tab on there will tell you everything you need to know about the book, but also about booking a workshop if you'd like to do a workshop, or how to buy the video companion if you want to do a video workshop along with the book. And it also has links to all of the different places that you can get the book. You can get it on Amazon, through Christian book distributors, through the publisher. There's a lot of different options on there for where you can buy the book.
Awesome. Great stuff. And yeah, I definitely heavily recommend it. Personally, I'm glad I have it on Kindle because like I can do like the tab and like go to the recipes, and it's really easy. For cookbooks,
great.
Kindle's been amazing. I didn't expect that particular benefit, but I'm like, actually, yeah, it's nice to be able to just click which recipe I want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's nice.
But all right, guys. Well, again, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Kendall, for joining us. If you are listening and you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend, an enemy, or a cousin, especially your cousins, as TJ would like you to. I don't know. He wants us to have like 4 families that listen, but like really big families. So you guys have to share. I don't know. But I also want to remind you guys that you can get merch like the super comfy t-shirt that I'm wearing here. We are very intentional with the comfort level of our stuff that we put out, because I'm like, people aren't going to wear stuff just because I think it looks good. People wear the comfy stuff. So if you go to our store that's in the show notes, you will get it. And you see any of the merch there, I give you my guarantee that it's super comfy and that you should order one size up. That's my personal suggestion. But I mentioned earlier some of the shows that's on the Amazon Podcast Network. My pastor, he has his own on there. That's the homilies. If you just want to hear some of his homilies, you can go to the homily on Amazon Podcast Network with Pastor Chill Will, and you'll hear some of his. Kung Fu Pizza Party, Brandon Knight, great show. Make sure you check out all the shows on the Amazon Podcast Network, because TJ will be happy that I did my part. And I hope you enjoyed this week again. Next week, we're going to be talking with Brandon Roberts and discuss his work as progressive Christian author, pastor, and Bible scholar. After that, we will have on Dr. Bruce Eberly to discuss charismatic movements and the need for churches that both believe in the power of the Spirit and the accepting love of God. Then we're going to have on Brian Recker to discuss his Instagram reels on church dogma and his new book, Hellbent. We have a lot of other really fun stuff. We have Bible 101. The authors of that book's coming on. So just keep waiting. We're going to have some good stuff coming up. Finally, at the end of season 1, of course, Francis Chan's going to be on, but he doesn't know about it. So you guys do have to tell him, because I don't know. We just keep doing this bit. And the more we have actual authors on, the more I'm like, maybe we need to chill with this bit. But I don't know. We're still doing it. All right. Here are the bread, recording this separately. Who knows how I edit this in? TJ and I both tried some of those recipes from the book Bake and Pray with Kendall Vanderslice, and we just want to talk about some of what we tried. So, TJ, I don't know which ones you did exactly. What breads were you?
Oh, I did the oat bread, the bannock.
Oat or oat?
Oat. St. Bridget's oat bread.
Okay. Do you remember anything about the story behind that one?
I don't.
Did I even send that to you?
Did? Pretty sure you did. I'm pretty sure that's where I got the recipe from. If not, it manifested in my mind and on my phone screen very clearly.
Perfect. So I tried a few different ones. All the ones that I tried were from the Eastertide section. I tried the hot cross buns, the pasca, and the pinka. I've not done the defo-dabo. Yeah. Wait, no, I didn't try the hot cross buns. I did do the defo-dabo. I did pasca, pinka, and defo-dabo. My favorite is very easily the pinka, because it's sweet Croatian bread with a little bit of orange citrus and rum involved. It was like Kendall Vanderslice at least kind of like, you know what? Talk to Josh at some point. He's going to want something with oranges and rum. Let me make sure I include this bread in here. So that's the only reasonable explanation I got. But no, I liked all of them. The pinko was a little bit sweeter. It kind of looks like a giant dinner roll almost when it was done. The delectable is supposed to be wrapped in banana leaves. I didn't have any, so I used parchment paper instead. It's a little bit of spicier, so it's a bread. I think it was Ethiopian, perhaps. Yeah, Ethiopian. It's an Ethiopian bread. It's no yeast in that recipe, so that one was really interesting. And then the other one I did was the Pascha. It's Ukrainian. I talk about that some in the original recording with Kendall Vanderslice. So it was really meaningful to try a Ukrainian recipe around Easter in our current times where Ukraine is in so much threat and turmoil, and to be able to participate in this and thinking about praying Christ as our bread and what they're going through at the same time was, that was very meaningful. As far as a baking experience goes, it was probably the most meaningful one I could conjure up, even if it wasn't my favorite of the breads. It's actually probably my least favorite of the breads. It just tasted like regular bread with icing on top when I did it. I probably did it wrong.
That sounds incorrect.
Yeah, it was like, this is regular bread that for some reason has icing on it. I don't know. But yeah, TJ, tell me something about yours.
Yeah, so I did mine. I had a friend in town. It was like right around my birthday. And
perfect.
That's also why I didn't get a picture of it. Just because we baked it and ate it immediately. Which is my bad. We waited for the bread for a while, but it's super easy. The hardest part was finding rolled oats, which they're not that hard to get. I just didn't see any. So I grabbed quick oats. I made it with quick oats instead, and I think it made the bread a little more dense than it was supposed to be. But it was still delicious. We had with a little milk, little honey, as is, recommended. But
that does sound good though.
The one thing I thought was really interesting was this was an Irish folk bread, like pagan Irish folk bread. Yeah, originally. Cool. I was marked, cut into quarters because you traditionally make it on a quarter day, February 2nd, which is a quarter day is the day between a solstice and an equinox.
That's my anniversary.
It is your anniversary.
Sorry.
Very impactful day, February 2nd.
That's cool.
Yeah. And if you don't know, his anniversary was also
2020.
2222. Or
2020.
Yeah, whatever that was.
Yeah. One of those fun things where it's the same forward and backwards. So I would remember.
Yeah. But it was really, really good. Yeah. It's also really fun to bake, which is the easiest part to forget. Every time I make bread, I'm like, wow, I should totally do this more often. And then I don't.
Yeah. I definitely get where it's like a spiritual, peaceful practice for Kendall.
Yeah. Most of the reason, though, that I forget to make bread is I'm nearly positive you have my bread pan at your house.
That might be the pan that I used to make the Pascha that I wasn't supposed to make in a pan, turns out. I was supposed to make it in like a coffee can or something.
Yeah. That's very Ukrainian.
Yeah. I also think I need to try the Pascha bread again, because it was the first one I tried, and I've never baked before.
Yeah, you have to follow.
So I think I've gotten better since I did that first one.
You have to follow the instructions when you're baking.
Yeah, really well. But it also had a gold raisin in it, and that was kind of cool. So I think it was supposed to be sweet. I think I messed up. Yeah. But the pica, the one that I like the most, that was like the sweet with the citrus and the rum and stuff in it. I made it last week, and we had some with a steak dinner when Christian Ashley came over. Bread was still really good. Doesn't really go great with steak. I think if I was to do another bread with the steak, I would probably try that delectable again. That has a little bit of that spiciness to it, and it's a little denser of a bread. I think that probably would have went better.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, but they were all great. I love the recipes. And just like you mentioned, like just that practice of baking. I've never really baked before, so it took me a while to figure out kneading. And in the book, it has like the stretch and pull method. Stretch and fold, that's what it's called, stretch and fold method. And I was like, oh, okay. So I had to learn how to knead. And you know how I am with learning physical things.
Bad.
Yeah, my attention span's not high. But once I started doing it a few times, I really started getting it better. And Chef Vanderslice mentioned on our recording that, like, because I talked about how some of them ended up not cooking all the way. There was like a little bit of doughy section. She was like, yeah, you live in a humid area. You need to cook it slightly longer. That did wonders.
Yeah. Then no one ever well, I'm sure they do teach you that in like culinary school and stuff, but just casual information, like online recipes, no one's ever going to mention that to you ever. The altitude and like environmental conditions that you're in drastically changes how you cook things.
Yeah, which is also where like so many different countries and places, when you go through here, you realize why their bread recipes are so different, because the background of the country, the culture they live in, the temperature outside actually matters to how you bake it. Like there's so many different factors, and it's just so interesting. It makes a lot of sense why so much history and culture goes into some of these recipes. It was really cool learning about, practicing, starting to bake. And I think I'm going to keep making breads more often. It is peaceful because it forces me to be engaged enough that I can't get distracted. What I'm going to do when I have dough all over my hands? Kneading's my only option.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And you can't, well, you can knead with one hand, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
True. So true. Accurate. Yeah. But yeah, so I encourage everybody to get it, learn more about these traditions, the cultures that go into some of these recipes. And yeah, if you listen to the rest of the episode, you'll know why I think that's important and why it can be important to communion, maybe.
Yeah.
As well as spiritual practice in general.
It's also just like a super fun thing. Just get the book.
Yeah.
Cook one a week. Every other week, whatever. Yeah. Just bake your way through it.
And pray. Pray your way through it. Bake and pray.
Bake and pray.
Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, you can always sponsor our efforts to educate and unite the church on Captivate, Patreon, or Apple Podcast. If you're not into the subscription thing, again, you can leave a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the description notes. Thank you again, and please come back next week.